Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution we know we need.
Me and my wife was walking around town, and everywhere we went, people turned us down, Lord, in a bourgeois town. Bourgeois town. I got the bourgeois blues, gonna spread the news all around. Home of the brave, land of the free. I don't wanna be mistreated by no bourgeoisie in a bourgeois town. Bourgeois town. I got the bourgeois blues. Spread the news all around.
That was Eric Bibb with the Bourgeois Blues, talking about a bourgeois town. Don't worry, though, our next guests might be mad as hell at Kingset Capital, commodifying their community and profiteering off of gentrification and displacement, but they are far from singing the blues. They are, in fact, gearing up for another peak in their fight, their long fight against a real villain, but one that has been aided and abetted by Toronto City Councilors, bureaucrats, and, of course, the mayor. You'll hear from them just how easy it is to hate on these heartless real estate investors. I mean, they are awful. But we expect that from them. No, instead, what frustrates these housing activists the most is the people they elected to help the community. They end up being some of the biggest barriers. We've dedicated so much time on this show to the topic of tenant organizing because we believe it is one of the most effective front lines in this class war we're in. I've included a link to our Tenant Power playlist so you can hear all the great interviews we've done so far. This next discussion is one of them. As their name suggests, these folks are organizing around a very specific address in downtown Toronto, but this fight goes way beyond 214-230 Sherbourne. It is part of this larger movement to realize our power as the tenant class, which can be a way of reimagining the working class and how we organize it. Let's get to it. All right, welcome. Can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, my name is Sylvia, and I'm a organizer with 230 Fightback.
Yeah, I'm Gaetan, also an organizer with 230 Fightback, but also have worked with the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty since the beginning, and organized in the downtown East Toronto for a long time.
Folks will know that also as OCAP. We've talked about OCAP on the show before when we had John Clark on. I'll link the episode in the show notes for folks to kind of get a little bit of a history there. But I have a feeling we're going to talk about OCAP a little bit just because of the project that you're working on now, 230 Fightback. Who's going to explain to us, though, what 230 Fightback is? 230
Fightback's just an organization that began last fall, about 19 months ago, and it was formed as a result of an application that was done by Kingset Capital, who had bought a property, 230 Sherbourne, in March of 2022, and there had been a long campaign. We can get into that later, but there had been a long campaign by the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty since at least 2013 to ask the city to either buy or expropriate the property. I guess after a while, the campaign kind of died off after it was bought, but it was revived by a small group of ex-OCAP people that became 230 Fightback, and I think it was only about 4 or 5 people at first, and then we went and recruited Sylvia and Kelly to join us and began a campaign to call on the city to negotiate with KingSett Capital to buy the land or expropriate the land again. Same kind of campaign, except the difference is that now KingSett Capital owned it and we're wanting to develop it.
So how long, Gaetan, have you been involved with this campaign? You say a long time, and I read an article that called it a decade, but even that article was old. So this has been a long, long time coming for this very particular property.
OCAP in the 1990s began a campaign called Use It or Lose It campaign, where we called on the city to expropriate properties that were vacant or empty. And we have numerous squat action, for lack of a better word. Probably the most famous being the Pope squat. We were there. But the campaign for 214-230, I don't know if you want to give me in the details of what that is actually, but it was a three-rooming houses that were bought by the Taninja families in 1986 to 1996. They paid under $1 million for the properties, which was about $860,000, I think they paid. And then they boarded up the rooming houses in 2008. And the campaign to expropriate the properties or get the city to buy it began in earnest in 2013, when we actually went over and took over the vacant lot for about 5 hours and worked with at some point during that campaign with Kristen Montan and trying to get them to buy the property. And then there were some negotiations with the owners, but they refused to sell. Then it went dead for a while. But then things really took off when it came up for sale in March 2022. The city, and we'll talk a lot more about this later on, but the city actually bid for the property, but were outbid by KingSett Capital. And then from there, the campaign was a little dormant after that. But when we found out that it was bought, then a group of ex-OCAP people said that we couldn't allow the property to be developed by KingSett Capital or any developer for that site. We were calling for social housing on the site. The city had already, it was already part of the city's plans to develop, to buy that property so they could redevelop Dan Harrison, which is just around the block.
The use it or lose it. We see a little bit of that now with all the office towers that are vacant, more campaigns gearing up around there. We even have, heaven forbid, the Conservatives were tweeting out today about clearing out the CBC and using that building for affordable housing units. So everyone is use it or lose it for was the campaign surrounding vacant buildings specifically? And when you say squatting actions, is that something that we would kind of call occupations now?
Well, occupation, I mean, the buildings that there was 8890 Carlton, which we fought for. Its history was it had a group of, I'm trying to remember the year now, 1996, 97, I can't remember. But there was a group of youth, 30 youth, who had been squatting 8890 Carlton for over a month, maybe even longer. And they were turfed out. They were turfed out, so we decided that we would go back because it had a good history. And we tried to take it over twice. The second time we made it very public, and a number of people were arrested. But eventually the city bought the property, and it now is part of the Region Park redevelopment. They actually, there's social housing now at 8890 Carlton.
That's the same neighborhood as the 214-230 Fightback.
Yeah, just near Island Gardens, maybe a block or two. And then from where we are, it's not that far.
I'd like to get into the journey of this campaign in a second, but still going back to the beginning, what makes this particular property? Was it because it was already like social housing, it was already boarding houses, or is there also something else special about this particular location that has helped maintain this campaign this long? Like most people, you've been dealt so many turns and twists, and like organizationally, and then through the city. Is there something very special? Because I'm not from the area, and you're going to have an audience members going like, why wouldn't you just maybe find another location? This seems like a lot, but what is it?
So 214-230 is important historically. One, because there were 3 rooming houses on there, so they were at any point about 60 to 70 people living in those 3 rooming houses. And so when they were boarded up, we lost all that housing. But part of and also the house that is still standing because it has historical value, 230 Sherbourne, was a rooming house going back to 1911. But the history that's really important for that, for us, is a homeless woman named Drina Gerbert died, froze to death across the street from All Saints Church, right behind 230 Sherbourne. There used to be a garage there. She froze to death in an abandoned truck. Out of that, the Toronto Union of Unemployed were in the neighborhood and organizing in the neighborhood at that time. And out of that, they called for organizing around Drina Gerbert's death. At that time, single adults couldn't get social housing. It just wasn't there. So they formed a coalition called Housing Not Hostels and called for an inquest. As a result of that inquest, 2 important things happened. One is that 3,000 units of social housing for single adults were built. And also single adults for the first time were able to access welfare to get social housing. And so it was really important. The other last thing I'll say, connected not directly to 214, 230, is that corner has a really long history of resistance. So in the 1970s, Jane Jacob, John Sewell went and stopped the demolition of a house called Enoch House, which is was just across the street almost from 230 Sherbourne. And as a result of that fight, Mayor Crombie at the time either bought or expropriated 25 rooming houses that are just north of Dundas there along Sherbourne. People are still living in those houses run by Toronto Community Housing. And the last thing is across from where the church is, across from 230, is 61 units of social housing that were built for single adults that were built as a result of the inquest. So the reason that you'll see a lot of single adults in the area walking, and some of them, we worked with the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, is because of that fight. And there's been other fights. There was fights in St. Jamestown around developers, and a whole bunch of rooming houses were saved there. So there's a long history of that.
I think the audience will see this pattern of this struggle for very key resources, because we know when we often lose social housing, we don't get it back. So just to maintain what we already had, but it's also talk about a struggle against a large developer, right, with deep pockets. And we've talked about that before. There's a lot of tenant unions. This isn't quite a tenants union, is it? It seems the battle is sort of structured as the tenant union struggles are structured, in that, there's a community members going up against a large developer. This one wouldn't have rent caps or anything else in mind. You're actually looking to acquire these large properties towards housing by any means necessary. Sylvia, is this one building here important to the larger struggle?
Yeah, I mean, there's people that are involved with 230 Fightback are coming from various kinds of organizing, and initially, there is a lot of members that were former OCAP that were tied to the campaign and its legacy. But I think over the months that we've been organizing, we've gotten people involved that have dealt with KingSett in other ways, whether it's as tenants, because KingSett is a landlord in some spaces, or people that recognize what KingSett kind of represents largely in Toronto and beyond as this large developer for-profit that is flipping land for their own gain and building these, actually at times they're not even building, they're just involved in flipping land to gain profit. And people have been recognizing that KingSett is like these other corporations, whether it be Dream, whether it be Starlight, and they see the fight for 230 as being tied to all these fights in other communities as well.
What is the goal of 230 Fightback when it comes to KingSett?
We would like the property to be turned into social housing. KingSett right now is looking to, well, they've claimed that they are offering to sell it back to the city, but they are trying to gain a profit off of their own speculation. So their initial, what they bought it for, and I'm not as good at remembering numbers, but they bought it for a profit for the initial owners of the land, and they outbid the city, knowing that the city was bidding for it. And they are now maybe realizing, there's not as much profit in the condo market at the moment, perhaps, or they're turned off from the neighborhood for other reasons, and they were offering to sell it back to the city, but for more than they paid for.
I guess that's the name of the game.
Yeah, and so for us, we don't want them to be profiting off of, this. We want social housing to be built there. That's
so dirty. This commodification of home is so frustrating. It's heartless at its core. So to see the stories coming out that folks are using AI tools to even be more callous about increasing rent is, really helping us demonize these corporate real estate investors, landlords. It's all like, in the end, they're probably all very similar companies, one buys, the other one manages and whatnot. But again, they're all very deep pockets. So a lot of people who are listening are organizers and activists themselves. So I do want to get into the story before I go off on tangents and forget of how this maintained itself, or rather, I think you described it as dying down and then being revived. Can we get into that a bit? Like why it died down? Because it was kind of a defeat. There was the city was outbid by KingSett, and I guess you thought maybe folks thought the fight was over.
I can't speak to exactly all the reasons why it lost momentum in OCAP, but I was involved in OCAP in the later years, and I think there's a few reasons why it lost steam there, and perhaps there wasn't activity happening for a long time, and so people were having trouble engaging with the campaign. People were joining OCAP, and OCAP is a broader issue kind of organization, so people were trying to engage with other campaigns, other kinds of actions that maybe they weren't as drawn towards the 230 campaign at the time. I think there was a lot of action happening with encampment support, which definitely took people's capacity, and rightfully so. It was very important and urgent, but I think that maybe lost some of the energy for the 230 campaign. So, yeah, I can't speak for all the reasons of why people lost interest. I do think there was a lack of activity for a little while too. Like when something like the city's bidding for it, there's an immediate action that we can respond to. We can do something. When there's no activity and it's just this lull, it was probably harder to engage, especially newer organizers to have the enthusiasm and yeah.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, just also some of us had already left the organization by the time by the time that KingSett bought the property. I mean, some of us were still around a bit, and there was still a bit of a fight. But after that, and left for various reasons. I mean, some of us, I was getting ready to retire. I was burning out. Whatever. There's people have various reasons, and like Sylvia said, it 230 Fightback wasn't on the burner, but then again, what really set it off is when some of us found out that KingSett Capital was going to build that condo tower. But also, we didn't know anything when we first formed about KingSett Capital. We knew little. I know that Sylvia has done some research on them also. And so a lot of our work at that time was to begin to understand what is a private equity company, who is KingSett Capital, and just the last thing I want to add to in terms of why 214, 230 is important and how we organize. And what helped us a lot. I have to say that the work that the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty did around 214, 230 was instrumental in us being able to pick up the battle again, right? It wasn't we weren't coming out of nowhere. A lot of people knew about that history. All the social agencies knew about the fight and all that kind of stuff. It meant reviving it. And also, it's 214, 230 is located, if people all know, at Dundas and Sherbourne, one of the oldest working class neighborhoods, in Toronto, and it's being gentrified. And we can talk a little bit more about that, what's happening around the Dundas corridor. And we just couldn't watch that anymore. And particularly around that property.
I think a lot of organizations out there can relate to having multiple projects on the go and trying to maintain momentum, especially when there's not like a pressure point, like an imminent sale or development or something to kind of rally around, or it wasn't so much a defeat, but just like a multitude of factors that played into it. But the revival, was there, just even personally, was it because they were going to turn it into condos? Like, it was like, hell no? Because, you had to figure they weren't going to build rooming houses. These folks, right? KingSett is not in that business. Or was it just the fact that, like, hey, there's something that reminded us that this building is still a battleground?
It was more than hell no. It was fuck no. I remember the meeting when and what happens is, we heard from Greg Cook, who's with Sanctuary, who sent us the things like, look what's happening, and then we made a call and we had a small meeting, with 4 or 5 people, and made a decision. And some of us hadn't been active in a little while, and I don't know if I should tell this story, but the reason, part of the reason we got together was because of something that happened about a month or so before that, where the same people who got together around KingSett had organized around one of my coworkers who was on sick leave, who had not received any payments for 6 months. And we said, why is that happening? And we got together and we went to the office and then said to...
KingSett was their employer?
No, KingSett had nothing to do with this. This was a group of people who, had worked with OCAP, organized with OCAP, and hadn't done...
A reunion.
...much in, let's say a year or so. And this thing came up, and we called people. 5 or 6 of us went, and the woman, Nazarene, was able to get her money, and we were really, really, really upbeat about that. And then this thing with KingSett happened. And I don't know, I'm curious to know what Sylvia and even Kelly thought when Wendy was the one that got a hold of them to say, hey, this is happening. What did you think?
I'm not going to get into details, but my departure from OCAP wasn't pleasant. And I think same goes for a couple other people. And in a way, it felt like we had this energy that we wanted to use towards something, and we lost, this kind of group to be involved with. So Wendy, another member of 230, who was also in OCAP, had been in touch with me and another friend, and mentioned that, hey, we're going to start organizing around this. Do you want to be involved? And it's like, yes, I want to be doing something, It felt, like had this energy, had these skills to use. So it was good timing to have something to move into from OCAP. And I joined because I wanted to be involved with some of these same people, other organizers from OCAP, and people I respect, and I wanted to learn from them. And it seemed like a great opportunity to be involved in something.
Just to understand, just as when we formed 235, we had nothing. We didn't have any money. We didn't have an office. We didn't have any social media. We didn't have a place to meet. All of that.
That sounds familiar.
And we still said, okay, we're going to go. And one of the hardest things we had to do was set up a bank account, of all things. It took us months to do that.
You're not the first people to tell us that
I know. It's just a night. It's just a nightmare.
The Rifle Association, the Socialist Rifle Association, had some issues, but maybe you can understand.
Yeah, so we began, and then we had to find a place to stay. So we began to rely on some of old allies, so we began to meet at Street Health, which OCAP had, Ontario Coalition had a relationship. We also began to meet, have some events at All Saints Church. And don't forget, this is kind of like just post-COVID.
We're not post-COVID.
Yeah.
We all wish we were post-COVID.
So it was really hard to to negotiate all that, and also where some of the people that came along, like Sylvia, around social media and others around finances, we began to develop a group of people who had various skills and making posters. We rely heavily on Sylvia to help us with posters, that kind of stuff. So all of that had to be done from scratch. The money was a little rough at first to make sure that we had some money to function, and we did when OCAP folded. OCAP did give us money, which was very helpful. Also money for archives for the Ontario. So all of that is going on, and I think right now, in terms of those issues, in terms of space to meet, right now we actually meet in Regent Park at Daniel Spectrum, but weren't sure how to move forward at first, but.
That is a great story, because again, I think there's a lot of people who found themselves in that situation or are in that situation. There's something worth fighting for in their community and they just don't know where to start. Like, there's no organization. There's, maybe a few comrades that are equally as pissed off and determined to do something. And collectively, there is a skill set to leverage. What was the biggest barrier, though, to reviving that project, considering there's already been a decade of work and such a formidable opponent? Part
of it is the fact that, the city had lost. Like when we met with Chris Moyse months later, his argument was basically, what are you doing here? You lost. We'll try and get another property somewhere else. Why are you pushing this? But I think for us, what really, really stuck in our, a thorn in our side was the fact that Kingset Capital outbid the city. But Kingset Capital knew that the city wanted to get that property, to buy that property, to build social housing. But furthermore, Kingset Capital does business with the city. The city gives them contracts, and the city, for instance, bought a piece of property off Kingset Capital, 877 Yonge. We can get into that story later on if you want, where 150 seniors were kicked out of their homes by Kingset Capital. So they went and bought that property for almost $100 million, and they get contracts. And just recently, Kingset Capital got $10 million in tax incentives where they don't have to pay them, like that happened last January.
From which government do we have to thank for that? The $10 million.
That one is the municipality.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Olivia.
Yeah, City of Toronto.
Yeah. The interesting thing with Kingset and the city is that Kingset is an easy enemy. Like it's so easy to show how terrible they are. They've done so much harm around the city. But the difficult thing has been dealing with the city and how complacent, city councilors are. They're just like, oh, well, this is the way it is. Oh, we know Kingset's terrible, but oh, well, what can you do? This is the city that these are the councilors that are representing the communities that are affected by developers like this. And they're just letting developers walk all over them. That's been pretty frustrating. And it's also because when we started, it was John Tory, right? And we had that direct connection between John Tory and Kingset because Kingset, different workers, or I guess employees of Kingset, had donated to John Tory's campaign. And there was this direct connection between Tory and Kingset, and we were able to, mobilize around Tory's terrible. When he left, and we have Olivia Chow coming in with her progressive agenda and claims of working with housing, there's this moment where people are thinking, okay, well, maybe something will happen, something good will happen. We haven't been able to really get much leeway with meeting with Olivia Chow. We finally had a meeting with 2 staff members, but it took a lot of time, and we were quite ignored for a long time. And I think a lot of organizations in the city are having that same issue of just being ignored by Olivia Chow in her office.
I'm recalling now from John Clark's social media feed there that you folks have gone beyond emailing, calling, and letters asking for a meeting. You folks have been outside of her office making some noise and then sharing that mission to just simply get some table time on social media. So that has got to be incredibly frustrating. I think, just so you feel a little better, you're not the only organization out there that is being ignored and greatly disappointed by the mayor. But I'm wondering, not that this should be your heavy lifting to do, but any idea who else KingSett is donating to? Because we've done a few episodes now to just cover how many. I mean, you even mentioned Christian Wong Tam, 40%, I think, of, maybe not 40%, I shouldn't, but they had a very high percentage of their campaign, municipal campaign, covered by developers. So there's almost like no councillors, at least in Toronto, that are not beholden in some way.
Yeah. I feel like I don't have to dig to say that probably Brad Bradford has had a lot of money from developers. And I'm not too sure specifically right now.
Someone out there is crunching those numbers, I hope.
Yeah.
I think that the frustration that and I don't know if Sylvia would agree with this, but the frustration that we've had, and because the campaign that 230 has taken on is very different in some ways than the campaign that the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty took, because there was a family that owned that property. Although they owned the Tenenjas, they owned a lot of the properties in the area
when the campaign started.
Yeah. But when KingSett Capital paid $53 million for that property, which is like a lot of profit for that family, then we were dealing with a different beast in terms of a private equity firm that has $19 billion in assets. And then we were beginning to deal with some of the councillors around this issue. Moise also had a discussion with Gordon Perks around this stuff, and they all seem to think the same way, that if you fight these people, the KingSett Capital or these developers, and that's true in Parkdale and others, what they fight for is what they call the community benefits. They feel that if they don't get a small park or I don't know, whatever they get, that they'll get nothing, because the corporation will just go to the province and get what they want. And I found my discussions, particularly with Gordon Perks, but also with Moise, very frustrating around the fact that they're unwilling to take on these developers who are literally buying up low-income neighborhoods, whether it's Parkdale or Dundas and Sherbourne, and unwilling to take them on. And right now we're at a stage, this issue is coming up on September 25th, where the planners are going to come up with a report with recommendations. We don't know what the recommendations are yet, although we can probably guess from the city. Yeah. And so it's going to the Toronto and East York Community Council on September 25th, and we're planning to mobilize for that. But once the planners make recommendations to accept the application, it's next to impossible to turn that around. When bureaucrats say that, and Moise would have a great say. So if Moise, is supportive, none of the other councillors will go. Historically, none of the councillors want to meddle with other wards. You'll go against them, right? You just don't do that, and so that makes it a little bit more difficult.
And it's really not worth their political time, right?
No.
They don't get those votes.
So that's been very frustrating. Trying to, I have to admit that when we did, occupy the lobby in front of Olivia Chow's place, by then we had learned, the year before, in December, we got an email from KingSett Capital, from Bill Logar, and he said basically that, I thought you should know this. We've offered the property to the city because we know how much this property means to you. That was the gist of it, and we're waiting for an answer.
That's so sweet.
I know. But what's worse is at that time we didn't know that some kind of negotiations had been going on since the summer, just after Olivia was hired. None of those staff bothered to tell us that was going on. I mean, it wasn't until we got that email and then we met with them and they said, okay, well, something's going on. We still don't know exactly how sincere or how, the city was or Kingset's were. I don't think they were very sincere about actually doing that. But it was a huge development for us that we went from, a property that was going to have a 47-story condo on it to, now there were some problems. There was other problems around flights. They couldn't build, whatever. But that was a really, really huge development. And but right now, again, on February 24th, Kingset reapplied or resubmitted some more papers, and they're trying to move forward with building on there. And in terms of where the city's at around whether surely Olivia and Create TO and Moise can sit at a table with some of these people at Kingset and make some kind of deal in terms of
They did. It sounds like they did make a deal.
They did.
Whatever.
They did. You're right. Yeah.
I was just trying to be candid, but I don't think I'm sounding very hopeful. But I mean, there are other avenues, but I'm thinking, the city has already decided, it sounds like, what they're going to do. And not that I want to let any of those people off the hook. I was trying to be nice there. Did you hear that? But it's a systemic issue too for municipalities, the way that they are so reliant on developers and real estate investors to make ends meet in the budget. I mean, because they spend all their money on cops and like there's other issues. Like they could have other ways to manage these relationships and perhaps leverage the power that they have. But I think between the way their campaigns are financed and the city is financed, it makes it really hard for them to look at developers in the same way we do as working class people, right? They're not really their foes. They're almost co-workers with a lot of these corporations. I mean, we see them go to the same dinners and like a very tight and reliant relationship there, which, makes your battle harder. But
yeah, I was going to say around that same time that we got that lovely email from Kingset, and that was because originally we were going to go march and rally in front of their office. And then they sent a note like, oh, don't rally in front of us, go bug the city.
So you're like, okay.
Sure. At that same time, there was the announcement that Kingset and the city were partnering on a affordable housing project in Etobicoke. And so it's like obvious that at this time that we're having this campaign that they are obviously having meetings with Kingset and organizing with them for other projects. So clearly there's relationships there that are ongoing and yeah.
Yeah, and part of the campaign that we're that is part of this Kingset battle is finding out that all three levels of governments are giving these developers hundreds of millions of dollars and public land to I know it just with Dream Unlimited they receive at Queen's Quay. So part of a campaign right now is to say that public money and public land is for social housing, not for greedy developers and for profit housing. We want that money that is these hundreds of millions of dollars are being given to developers to be given directly to the municipalities so that they can build housing in their own municipalities to house their people, and it'll be housing that will stay for people for generations. Just like I have a friend Barrick who lives in Toronto Community Housing, and that his building was built maybe in the 60s, and he's lived there for a long, long time. And when he's long gone, somebody else will move in there. So generation after generation, can use this housing. At this point in time, we have a situation where, just really briefly, if you go along the Dundas corridor, from Church to Sherbourne, I don't know if you know the area, but from Church to Sherbourne, there are 11 condo projects that are being developed. I think there's Kingset Capital, there's Mankaz, Pemberton, and a few others, 9 developers. And we estimate that they're pouring anywhere between $4 to $5 billion just in that short space. And anybody who's known Dundas and Sherbourne or have seen realizes that the neighborhood, people are being displaced. The neighborhood is being transformed at a pace that I've never seen. And Dundas and Sherbourne is important for that reason. That if we draw a line in the sand, which we have around that particular property in Dundas Sherbrooke, and then we feel that we can make a statement. And it's something that's happening across Canada, whether you're at East downtown Vancouver, Halifax, Montreal. These kinds of battles and things are happening on a regular basis. And I know in Europe there are huge fights around this kind of development that's going on right now.
What is at the corner right now? If I went there right now, what would I see? Construction fences?
A vacant lot and a boarded up home, rooming house. The one, because it has historical value and they can't tear it down. So KingSett can't tear it down. And actually their plans, their plans is they won't do that. And then across the street is All Saints Church, which, has had a community center there since the 1970s there. And then there's a little plaza that's really beaten up there. There's some rooming houses not far from there. There's some, the area is being bought up as we speak. Philmore's and the park block next to it got bought up for $52 million across the street. I don't know if it's Menkes who bought a whole bunch. So all of that is going on, and
then you have your counselor just telling you to just find another building, right? Like he can't understand. Like, I can even visualize it. I've been there many times. Like, I'm from Toronto, but he can't. He is too. That how important that has then become, considering all of the other gentrification that has gone on in Regent Park for so long now, right? Like, there has been so many battles. And how many properties are there left to make a stand like this? Not just for the value of that particular property and what it might mean for 60, 70 or whatever we could do with it, but that larger battle that you're talking about of transferring resources that are there, that we are seeing, right, being poured into other people, and using those resources for social housing or other community initiatives like that we're sorely lacking in. Is that what your action on September 10th is part of? I mean, like, you're always trying to draw attention to the 214, 230 case, but you're targeting all of them. All of the usual suspects are going to be there. So is that, I imagine that's part of the larger fight on your hands?
Yeah, I mean, with our fight, we started to realize how the same fight is happening in neighborhoods across the city and as Gaetan said, across Canada and beyond. And we've organized with other groups. So there's groups, South Junction, Triangle Grows, No Dem Evictions, Friends of Chinatown, Parkdale People's Economy, other groups as well. And they're fighting these similar battles in different communities, whether it's also against KingSett or it's, Starlight or Dream. Scale, I think, is in Parkdale. And we started to realize what these, they're all tied to each other. And so on September 10th, there's the Real REIT conference at the Metro Convention Center. And we obviously noticed because KingSett is going to have their lovely speaker there, but also will be Dream and all these other groups, as well as banks and investors, and they're all going to talk together, and they're gathering together to basically, have a conference.
Maybe even Galen Weston will be there.
He'll probably be hanging out there, and I'm sure a lot of our city councilors will even be there too. So all these baddies are going to be hanging out in one convention center, and we're going to disrupt, to say, like, okay, you're gathering here. We see you for who you are, and we do not want you coming to our neighborhoods and destroying our communities anymore. It's a event that is really representative of the fight of how housing is being commodified and financialized across the country, and all the big players are going to be there. So we're there to show up and let our voices be heard.
Yeah, just a little piece of research that Sylvia found recently, and other people mentioned, is that there's a man that some people might not know is John Beard. Is that John Beard, who used to be the Minister of Social Services in the Harris government, and then in the, I think it was the Maroney government, was the Minister of Finance. I'm not too sure.
Somehow you're going to make me hate this man even more. I have a feeling. Okay, I'm bracing.
Yes, he's now registered to lobby on behalf of Kingset Capital to the city.
Yeah, of course he is.
Yeah, he's hired by Bennett Jones, which is a law firm, and so he's their employee, but used by Kingset often uses. So we're beginning to make these links before all these Bay Street people. The first time I heard of Bennett Jones was, I forget the guy's name now. It was involved in the eviction of 150 seniors I told you about in the summer of 1999, and he was tied to Kingset. And then eventually we found out that Bill Logard and Rob Coomer, David what was his name, Vernon, were listed as directors of the company, and refused to talk about what they were going to do with the building, and refused to comment on the fact that they were evicting 150 seniors from that building. That was my first introduction to Kingset. Was I encourage anybody to Google Kingset Capital.
They're like your nemesis now.
Yeah. Just look up Kingset Capital 877 Young. City eventually bailed them out. And these connections are, I mean, John Beard was a nasty man. Like nasty. The Harris government was nasty, we saw. So these are the people who are working with Kingset Capital, who are working, doing business with the city, and who are fighting. Our biggest hurdle is private property.
Like the concept of private property, like John Locke's whole...
The concept, exactly. It's because it's sacred, right? So Kingset Capital owns the property. It's their property. They can do whatever the hell they want with that. Never mind that, maybe we don't need a 12th condo or 11th, 13th, or 14th condo, in the area that we probably need. We might need daycares.
But they'll have 5% affordable housing units and a photo opportunity for somebody. Come on.
Yeah, out of the 11 condo developments along that church to Sherburne, 6,379 condo units, 24 units of social housing. I always wonder what the planners, I guess they just don't think about it. I don't know that. I guess they have a formula, and their formula is, is there going to be enough parking? Is there enough shade? Is there all that kind of stuff? Whether we need another condo at that place, I really don't understand how they can kind of
sleep at night,
function, and pretend that somehow they have a function other than often the only thing they can do. And the councillors will tell you the same thing. The only thing we can do is rubber stamp it. We can't stop it. We can't. And we're saying no. We're saying you can say no to Kingset Capital on September 25th. We're saying no. Just so people understand, we've had major demonstrations over the last year and a half. Twice we've taken over, close to 200 people, leave from Dundas and Sherburne, march all the way to the Royal York, because Kingset Capital owns. John Love, by the way, is the one who created Kingset Capital, and they own 60% of the Royal York. They own, I think, most of the Scotia Plaza. So we marched for Dundas and Sherburne. We took our people from Dundas, Sherburne, took them to Bay Street to say this is what's going on. And just last summer, we actually broke through the fence, took over the property, the vacant lot, for a couple hours. We fed people. We had music. And for the first time people have to understand, this property has been empty for 16 years now. It's been 16 years. It's been vacant. And then we went and took it over. And there was life on that vacant lot. For something was happening. People were being fed. People were listening to music. There was people socializing. It had a life. And we're saying, that can happen. That if we build social housing on that will support our community. The housing in that area is desperately needed.
It's funny, we're getting near the end of our time, and we kind of get to this point where we're frustrated with where the battle's at, and the folks that can help us seem to be in the pockets of these same people we're fighting. So I'm going to go back to the squatters' actions, because that's not something... Now, encampments we see the battle for that space and how the city treats them, and so I can only imagine what the answer is to this, but we have not seen buildings being taken over by residents for that purpose, for squatting, but for surviving, for having a roof over their head. Was there a response from the authorities that really discouraged that behavior, or is that something folks are percolating in their minds at this point, especially as we get colder and more frustrated?
I mean, when these squats were happening to try and take over empty buildings, that was in the middle of the Harris years. Like Harris, came to power in 1995, cut welfare by 21.6%, and people were destitute. There was just nowhere to go, dying on the streets. And by 2001, in Toronto particularly, there was a large squatting tent city. It was called Tent City. It began around 1999. It ran for about two and a half years. The Toronto Disaster Relief Committee were the ones that did most of the work on that. OCAP was involved at the beginning. And then we, I think the summer of 2001, I think it was, we took over the Pope squat. But at that period also, there were squat movements in Montreal. Préfontaine was happening in Halifax, Quebec City, 7-year squat in Ottawa, all around the same time. And eventually, a lot of them were shut down. Tent City was shut down about a month before the Pope squat or so. And then the Pope squat people were evicted. The Tent City people did win, a big win where all of the people that were there got rent supplements to help them find housing that they were able to keep. So that was a good win. But in terms of, the squat movement in Toronto right now, I couldn't speak to it. I'm sure there are people who are squatting, but like you say, most people right now are more familiar with the encampments. And if you told me, that Moss Park and Allen Gardens would have, dozens and dozens of tents, when I wouldn't have believed you, but that's exactly what's happening.
I know, and I think we've seen a lot of communities, though, like encampments that have built up and been there for a while that we thought perhaps might have been untouchable to the city being torn down. Marilyn Bell Park was one of them that I can think of. But I'm just thinking, because just the tactic of occupying a building is usually done by, not outsiders, but temporarily, even like you speak of creating kind of that third space behind the fence to feed and congregate. But we have seen in other places more recently retaking buildings for that purpose because they seem to have some success. Or correct me if I'm wrong, the Pope squat resulted in that building eventually being bought by the city and turned into housing? No.
No, what it did do, it saved. We were there for 3 months. By the time the city moved in, I think there was maybe some 30 people who had lived on the streets. I remember Sam Tassu was one of them, and Lisa Kosick moved in and were living there. But people got turfed out. But what happened is that the person who owned a building next door to it, who rented apartments that were primarily single apartments or bachelors or whatever, bought the building. The city gave them some money to renovate. So the building is still being used by, low income people, in the sense that I don't know how cheap the rent is right now in terms of there, but 8890 was bought by the city.
I got you. Okay. So it seemed like it wasn't just cleared out, and it was successful in highlighting the need for space in that particular community. And, there was some action around that need. But do you folks want to speak to what, you probably don't, but what you will do after September 24th? Should you not like the recommendations? Should you these counselors tell you all the time, though, that your efforts are fruitless, right? Just give up, do something else. Once this goes through, there's no turning back. Or is that a reality?
Here's KingSet's problem. KingSet, John Love, Rob Coomer, Bill Logar, names that were beginning to become common to us. They don't like the limelight. So whatever happens on the 25th, and we hope that the City Council and the planners will do the right thing, KingSet is still stuck with a property that the community wants for social housing. they're stuck with that. They can make a decision. We know the history of what happened at that property in terms of their role and that kind of stuff. And before they can put a shovel in the ground, I think it's going to take them a while. It could be a few years. I don't know. I mean, they have to sell their condos. You know, they have to sell 70% of those condos before they can get the money from the banks to build the property. That's going to take a little while.
I imagine you're not going to make it any easier for them.
And we're not going to make it. No. So I don't know if Sylvia wants to. For us, the message will be clear that no condo is going up at 214, 230 Sherbourne, and there's a fight brewing. And if you intend to try and do that, we have a history of fighting back, and we'll fight back as hard as we can. We have no choice. We have no choice.
No, really. I get it. And it reminds me of the fight around the pipelines as well, right? Where then the buyers of the pipeline have to estimate the cost behind the social upheaval and resistance that comes with building a pipeline. And then we see the government just end up bailing them out and buying it for them. And it's like, well, city, why don't you just save us a step? Buy the damn property already and turn it into social housing. But Sylvia, how do you plan on making this even more difficult for our friends at Kingset?
Yeah, I was going to say, the thing with Kingset is that now we know them, and now we know...
Gaetan has the names like just on the tip of his tongue every time.
Yeah, and well, we know where they're also planning other developments, and we are joining with those communities, and we will keep disrupting them. They have plans, in South Junction. We'll be there. They have plans in Parkdale. We'll be there. We know where they're going, and we're not going to let up. They decided to stake a claim in a community they shouldn't have, and now they've made enemies of that community.
I love how you say that so calmly. Yeah, you tried to buy the wrong, or you bought the wrong building in the wrong part of town, friends.
No, that was put to them like that, by the way, Jess.
Good.
When we met with him, he said, "Why us?
Why are you picking on us?"
We did. He did say that, Bill Logart, and we said because you bought the wrong piece of land. You knew what you were doing, but the other component of this is the councillors will have to make a conscious decision about which side they're on. There is a lot of pressure that has been put on the city and to build social housing on that particular property. And it's not sufficient to say, well, let that go. We have a handful of other properties here and there. We want to use that. And we're saying, no, we want to keep our neighborhood. We want people to live there. It has a history of taking in, going back to the 1830s, of taking back people looking for work, people who are homeless, the Irish. Well, a long history of taking people in. And we're part of that history. People fought for that social housing after the Second World War, and we owe those people something. I live in a co-op right now, and I owe people who form co-op movements to defend social housing, and we're saying to these councillors, you pick a side, and if you pick the wrong side, we'll let people know this is the side you're on, whether you're Chris Morris, Olivia Chow, or Gordon Perks, or we know who they are. Yeah.
Because you know where they are and where they're going too, don't you, Sylvia? Right? So how can anybody listening make your mission a little bit easier? Obviously, I'm going to link them to your website and your socials in the show notes. And hopefully we have this episode up in time that at 12 o'clock you can join them. Where?
Metro Convention Center.
Everyone knows where that is if you're in Toronto. But beyond that, let's say they're listening, they're not able to join you to put the pressure on all those real estate investment companies. How else can they help the fight?
I think on September 25th will be a big day. The application that Kingset Capital put in, almost like 18 months ago, over 2 years ago, I don't know, is now going to come before a body that will say yay or nay. I think it's important if people can come. We're going to have a press conference in the morning at 9 o'clock. If they can depute, if they live in the community to give deputation, they can contact us, and we can kind of organize and get together. I think that day will be an important day in terms of the development of what happens at 2:14, 2:30.
Mm-hmm. And as we always say, join us, follow us on social media to keep up with all our actions. We're on x.com and Instagram. And we have a website that you can follow, 230fightback.com or .ca. To keep up with our actions, because also there are the other groups that we need to be supporting as well, No Dem Evictions and South Junction Triangle Growth. So follow us and see what all our allies are up to.
I would also suggest to listeners, I will again link you with so many resources, especially under the call to action tab there, but perhaps maybe you can give Kingset or Chris Moyes an email or a call. They have a page there on their website that gives you all the details you need to reach out to these people before September 25th so that they have it in their mind to make the right call. King said they've already put it in, but it doesn't mean you can't call them. So I will link people to that. I very much appreciate the work that you're doing, especially knowing you're networking with so many other community groups that, have similar goals, because knowing that these folks are just pulling this shit all across the neighborhood and they're working with their friends to use the same tools and tactics, which means that you folks can all use and lean on each other's tactics and knowledge and whatnot. So that's a big part of it. Very much appreciate taking the time to come and kind of give more blueprints to our audience, because I'm sure folks are proxy to some of these fights or wish they were. And now they know how to plug in with you or perhaps rinse and repeat in their own neighborhood.
Absolutely.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse.
That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.